The town of Avonvale had always been quiet, nestled between dense woods and foggy moors. It was a place where secrets stayed buried until the day he arrived. Rumors whispered about a man named Ezra Malik, a painter with a strange talent. His art was unlike anything anyone had seen, vibrant, haunting, and disturbingly lifelike. He moved into an old, decrepit mansion on the outskirts, a place long abandoned and rumored to be cursed. Ezra was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the veil of the living. He spoke little, only emerging from his home when summoned by wealthy patrons who had heard of his chilling skill. His paintings, they said, captured more than just the physical form. They captured the soul. Each brushstroke seemed to bind a piece of the person to the canvas, leaving behind a twisted reflection of their innermost fears and desires. The first time someone saw one of his works up close, they felt something unnerving, a creeping dread, as though the subject's eyes followed them around the room, pleading to be set free. It wasn't long before the townsfolk began to notice strange occurrences. Those who posed for Ezra fell into deep depressions, haunted by dreams so vivid they would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. They claimed they could feel themselves inside the paintings, trapped in an eternal limbo, their souls twisted into the strokes of oil and pigment. As word spread, fewer people dared to commission him, but the allure of his art was undeniable. Each piece he created seemed to draw crowds in, like moths to a flame. One day, a particularly wealthy noblewoman, Lady Isabel Worthing, commissioned Ezra to paint her portrait. She was vain, beautiful, and proud of her pristine appearance. But after hours of sitting before the silent, unblinking artist, she left the mansion a different person, pale, gaunt, and filled with an unspeakable dread. When the painting was unveiled, gasps filled the room. Lady Isabel stood before her likeness, staring at the canvas with wide, horrified eyes. The image was her, yet it wasn't. Her reflection was grotesque, her once flawless features distorted into a gnarled, skeletal visage. Her eyes were sunken, her mouth twisted into an eternal scream. The colors swirled violently, as though the canvas itself was alive, pulsating with a dark energy that made the air feel thick, suffocating. Lady Isabel fled that night, and no one saw her again. The mansion grew darker after that. People swore they heard faint whispers carried on the wind, like the voices of those lost within the paintings, calling out for release. It became known that Ezra didn't just paint portraits. He captured something far more sinister. He was a collector of souls. The truth of Ezra's power began to unravel when a young artist named Marlowe, fascinated by the man's work, decided to investigate. Marlowe had always admired Ezra's technique, the way his brush seemed to dance across the canvas, breathing life or something more into the art. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He visited Ezra under the guise of seeking an apprenticeship, hoping to learn the secrets of his craft. Ezra agreed, but only under one condition. Marlowe would have to sit for a portrait. It was an offer Marlowe couldn't refuse, though dread churned in his gut. The sitting was long, unnervingly silent, with Ezra's sharp eyes flicking from the canvas to Marlowe and back, as though dissecting his very essence. As the hours dragged on, Marlowe felt a strange weight settle over him, like invisible chains tightening around his chest. The room grew colder, the shadows deeper, and he could swear he heard faint whispers, as though the walls themselves were alive. When Ezra finally finished, Marlowe was allowed a glimpse of his portrait. The sight made his blood run cold. The image on the canvas was him, yet not him. His skin was pallid, his eyes empty voids. Behind him loomed a swirling mass of darkness, where hundreds of faces screamed silently in torment. Their twisted forms seemed to writhe, as if trying to claw their way out of the painting and into the real world. Marlowe stumbled back, gasping for air, but his breath caught in his throat. The whispers grew louder now, filling his head, pleading, crying. He could feel them, the souls trapped, desperate, clawing at the edges of their prison. He turned to Ezra, whose hollow eyes gleamed with something far darker than madness. "You see," the painter murmured, his voice a mere rasp, They live in my work. Forever. Marlowe fled the mansion that night. But as he ran, he could feel the weight of the portrait pressing on his soul, a piece of himself forever lost, forever bound to the canvas. The townsfolk say that those who look too long at Ezra's paintings can feel the pull, a dark force beckoning them closer, as if the art itself hungers for more souls to devour. And Ezra? He continues to paint, his studio echoing with the silent screams of the damned. Each new canvas adds another tortured spirit to his twisted gallery, their eyes forever watching, forever suffering, forever lost. Marlowe couldn't shake the feeling of the portrait's pull, even after he escaped the mansion. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it, his face twisted in agony, the mass of souls writhing behind him. The weight of it pressed on his chest, suffocating him with each breath. He tried to return to his studio, to paint, but every stroke of his brush seemed futile, lifeless, as if Ezra had drained him of all creativity, leaving behind an empty shell. Weeks passed, and the town of Avernvale grew darker. People spoke of Ezra in hushed whispers, avoiding the mansion at all costs. Those who had sat for his portraits were disappearing, one by one, leaving behind only shadows of themselves, pale, hollow-eyed figures who wandered aimlessly until they vanished entirely. It was as though their very essence had been consumed, devoured by the artist's dark magic. Marlowe's sleep grew restless, plagued by nightmares of the souls trapped in Ezra's paintings, their faces stretching and twisting, their silent screams growing louder in his mind. One night, he awoke in a cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't take it any longer. He had to stop Ezra before more souls were claimed by the cursed painter. Arming himself with nothing but his resolve and a lantern, Marlowe made his way back to the mansion. The night was thick with fog, and the wind howled through the trees like the wails of the damned. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows dark, its walls decayed and covered in creeping ivy. It looked like a mausoleum, a grave for the living. As Marlowe approached, the front door creaked open on its own, as if the house itself was inviting him in. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The air within was stifling, cold, and damp. Shadows flickered along the walls, but there was no fire, no source of light. His footsteps echoed in the empty halls, growing louder with each step, as though the mansion was alive, amplifying the sound to a deafening roar. He found Ezra in his studio, hunched over a new canvas. The room was lit by a single, dim candle, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. Paintings lined the room, each one more grotesque than the last. The faces of the damned stared out from the canvases, their eyes filled with terror, their mouths twisted in silent agony. Ezra didn't turn as Marlowe entered. His brush moved in slow, deliberate strokes, as though he was painting with more than just paint, something deeper, darker. The air in the room was thick with an oppressive energy, a malevolent force that seemed to press down on Marlowe's chest, making it hard to breathe. "You came back," Ezra said without looking up, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I knew you would." Marlowe's hands trembled, but he forced himself to speak. "You have to stop this. You're trapping souls in these paintings, damning them for eternity." Ezra paused, his brush hovering over the canvas. Slowly, he turned to face Marlowe. His eyes were darker now, empty pits of shadow, as if the light had been drained from him entirely. "I am not trapping them," he said, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. "I am preserving them. These souls are mine, willingly given." "Given?" Marlowe's voice cracked with disbelief. No one would willingly give their soul for this torment. A thin smile crept across Ezra's face, a smile that didn't reach his hollow eyes. "You don't understand, Marlowe. The soul is fleeting, fragile. But in my hands, it becomes eternal, immortal. They live on through my art forever. Isn't that what every artist wants? To be remembered?" Marlowe shook his head, backing away from the twisted painter. "This isn't immortality. This is suffering." Ezra's smile faded, his face twisting into something darker, more sinister. "Suffering is the price of eternity. Without pain, there is no art. Without torment, there is no beauty. Marlowe's gaze flicked to the newest canvas, the one Ezra had been working on when he entered. His blood ran cold when he saw the image forming. There it was him, his own face, twisted in agony, his eyes wide with terror. The souls behind him swirled in a storm of darkness, their mouths open in silent screams, as if trying to drag him into their endless torment. "No," Marlowe breathed, his heart hammering in his chest. "You've already started." Ezra stepped closer, his voice soft, almost hypnotic. "You belong here, Marlowe. You're an artist like me. You understand the need to capture the essence of the soul. You know that true art comes from the depths of suffering." Marlowe stumbled backward, the weight of Ezra's words pressing on him like a vice. He could feel it now, the pull of the painting, the dark energy creeping over him like cold fingers wrapping around his throat. The souls in the paintings were not just trapped. They were hungry, ravenous for more. They needed him. They wanted him. Ezra raised his brush, a wicked glint in his eyes. "Come, Marlo. Let me finish what I've started. Let me make you immortal." But Marlowe's fear turned to rage. He couldn't let himself be consumed, not like the others. With a sudden burst of defiance, he grabbed the lantern and hurled it at the nearest painting. The glass shattered, flames licking at the canvas. The souls within it screamed not silently, but audibly, a piercing wail that filled the room and rattled the very walls of the mansion. Ezra's face twisted in fury. "No," he bellowed, lunging toward Marlowe. "You don't know what you've done." But it was too late. The flames spread quickly, consuming the paintings one by one. Each time a canvas was touched by fire, the souls trapped within howled, their tormented faces warping and melting away as the flames devoured them. Marlowe could feel the mansion itself groan under the weight of the destruction. The walls began to crack, the floorboards splintering beneath his feet as the oppressive force in the air seemed to break apart, unraveling the dark magic that held the souls in place. Yet, through the smoke and flames, Ezra still stood, his eyes blazing with a fury that could only come from someone who had lost everything. "You fool," he roared. "You cannot destroy what is eternal." Ezra's roar echoed through the burning mansion as he lunged at Marlowe, his skeletal hands reaching out like claws. The flames reflected in his hollow eyes, making him look less human, more like one of the twisted souls he had imprisoned. Marlowe dodged, barely avoiding Ezra's grasp as the fire spread, devouring everything in its path. The heat was unbearable, the smoke thick, but Marlowe pressed on. He had to destroy the last of the paintings, or the souls would never be free. As he ran deeper into the studio, he could hear the agonized wails of the souls growing louder, more frantic. They were trapped, caught between life and death, their pain echoing in every corner of the cursed mansion. Through the flames, Marlowe spotted at the final canvas the one Ezra had been working on moments before. His own face stared back at him from the painting, twisted in torment, the souls behind him writhing and clawing at the edges of the canvas, desperate to escape. It was as though the painting itself was alive, pulsating with a dark energy that tugged at Marlowe's very soul. Ezra, still consumed by his rage, reached for Marlowe again, but this time, Marlowe was ready. He grabbed a broken piece of wood from the floor and swung it at Ezra, knocking him back into one of his own burning creations. The flames licked at the edges of Ezra's coat, but he didn't seem to notice, his eyes fixed on the final painting. "You can't escape this," Ezra hissed, his voice filled with venom. "You are a part of it now. Your soul belongs to the canvas." But Marlowe wasn't listening anymore. With all the strength he had left, he grabbed the final canvas, the one with his portrait, and threw it into the roaring fire. The painting ignited instantly, the flames dancing hungrily across the surface. The tortured faces in the background began to twist and warp, their screams blending into a single, deafening wail. Ezra's eyes widened in horror as his masterpiece was consumed. "No, you don't understand. Without the paintings, they will..." He never finished the sentence. The ground beneath Marlowe's feet began to tremble as the mansion itself groaned, its very foundation cracking under the weight of the dark magic unraveling. The walls, once solid, began to crumble, and the air was filled with the sound of splintering wood and falling stone. The souls, released from their eternal prison, surged through the room like a violent storm, swirling around Ezra as he screamed. His body began to twist and contort, his form warping like the faces in his cursed paintings. The souls he had imprisoned for so long turned on him, dragging him into the fire with them, their tortured wails echoing in his final moments. Marlowe stumbled back, his eyes wide as Ezra was consumed by the flames, his screams mingling with the roar of the fire. The mansion was collapsing around him, the very fabric of the dark magic tearing apart. He had to escape, or he'd be buried with the painter and his cursed creations. With smoke filling his lungs and the floor collapsing beneath his feet, Marlowe ran for the door. The walls crumbled as he sprinted through the hallway, flames licking at his heels. The once grand mansion was now a crumbling ruin, consumed by the fire of the soul's release. As Marlowe burst through the front door and into the cold night air, the mansion finally gave way, collapsing in on itself with a deafening crash. The flames roared higher into the sky, consuming the last remnants of Ezra Malik and his twisted art. Marlowe collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, his body trembling with exhaustion. The night was eerily silent now, the oppressive weight of the cursed souls finally lifted. The stars overhead seemed brighter, the air clearer, as though the town itself had been freed from the grip of Ezra's dark magic. But even as Marlowe lay there, catching his breath, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His skin tingled, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward the burning ruins of the mansion, and in the flickering light of the fire, he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the shadows, just beyond the flames, a figure stood tall, gaunt and unmistakable. Ezra Malik, or what was left of him. His hollow eyes glinted with something darker than death as he stared at Marlowe, his lips curling into a twisted smile. "You can burn the canvas," Ezra's voice echoed faintly in the wind, "but the soul remains." Marlowe's heart stopped. He looked down at his hands and saw the faint outline of ash clinging to his skin, his own portrait burned into his flesh. The curse wasn't gone. It had only just begun.